Welcome everyone to our first BioArbor event of this academic season. It is thrilling to see so many people here tonight. My name is Connie Chang. I'm the Director of Business Development for the University of Michigan Medical School. I'm also a very proud member of the steering group for BioArbor, which is our local life science industry and entrepreneurial association. And we are very happy to welcome you all here tonight, and I'll be introducing our panel of speakers in just a second. BioArbor strives to put on some really compelling and relevant programming for you throughout the year that's related to life science. We'll be delving into a lot of the issues that are near and dear to many of our hearts tonight, and we hope that you'll ask a lot of questions as well. We're going to try to leave at least half the session for questions tonight. I also want to thank our sponsors for BioArbor, without whom we cannot put on events of this kind of quality. Brinks, Hofer, Gilson, and Leone have been supportive of us for many years now, so we thank them. Also Mich Bio, as well as Ann Arbor Spark, and of course the University of Michigan Health System as well. I also want to make mention, and maybe you want to take your calendars out and mark Wednesday, October 24th, which is going to be our next BioArbor event. We're going to get right into the details of startup companies, and it's going to be a very compelling panel called When the Wheels Fall Off of Your Startup, What Do You Do? And it's going to be about rebooting, restarting that business plan when you recognize that you've got to make a major change in your corporate strategy. We're going to have the founding members of HandyLab there with us tonight, or there that night, which will be fantastic. And we're also going to touch on life magnetics. So Wednesday, October 24th. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our wonderful panel of experts tonight who are going to delve into a lot of the issues around life science innovation today and the kinds of innovative things that companies and the sectors that they represent are trying to do to spur and accelerate, re-accelerate, I should say, innovation. Here we have Eric Anderson, who is currently the Vice President of Product Development at Terumo Cardiovascular. Prior to that, Eric was Senior VP of R&D and Operations at Celminetics until its acquisition by Covidien. Prior to that, he was also Director of Product Development for Delphi Medical System, where he was in charge of a very large team of engineers, and he was also CEO of Tasso Solutions before that. Suffice it to say, Eric has a very, very long history of experience in the med device sector. He also got his Bachelor of Science degree in electrical and computer engineering from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So welcome, Eric. To his right, we have Tom Porter, one of our very own professors at the Ross School of Business, specializing in entrepreneurship and startups. He's also general partner for Trillium Ventures and was one of the co-founders of EDF Ventures, one of the venture capital firms right here in Ann Arbor. He is very known for his leadership role in founding companies such as Theragen, HandyLab, Coagulation Systems, et cetera, and he is very active in the entrepreneurial ecosystem here, helping to assess universities and leading research institutions in their technology development strategies. Next to him, we have Kevin Townsend, who received his PharmD from here in Michigan, as well as other degrees as well. And he is with Pfizer as their medical outcomes specialist and director in the Southeast Michigan area. He continues to hold an adjunct professor position here in the College of Pharmacy. And he's also an entrepreneur, having started a nonprofit company with his son recently that's focused on connecting low-income patients with medication assistance programs, which is fantastic. So welcome, Kevin. And last but not least, Dave Tice, who has over 12 years of pharmaceutical R&D experience, the last decade spent at MedImmune, so he's here visiting us from Maryland. MedImmune is the biologics arm of AstraZeneca, and he actually leads a number of preclinical programs in the oncology space. Prior to that, David was at Genentech, and we're very happy to have you here tonight. Okay, so with that, that's quite a mouthful. Maybe we'll get things going by getting your thoughts on, is there really a crisis of innovation in life science today? I was just watching a video clip of the CEO of who was talking about the global economic crisis and the impact that it's having that might have very long-term implications for product development in the med device sector and the therapeutic sector, diagnostic sector. What do you think?
Well, we're here today because we definitely do feel that there's either a crisis or a potential crisis. You know, as I take a look at our industry in the med device space, particularly as I look at large med device companies, the regulations that are imposed on us, the financial challenges that we've got, that it becomes increasingly difficult for us to really be the engine of innovation that we might have seen out of med device companies a generation ago. And so today, we really have to take a look at alternate sources of innovation that then we would take a look at either from a business development standpoint, a partnering or a licensing standpoint later. The other side of that, the challenge is that venture capital companies are increasingly placing more and more scrutiny on the startups that they're willing to go and make investments in. So really the lifeblood of growth in innovation that we're counting on as a large medical device company is continuing to dry up. And so those two factors coming together really put us in a position where we need to go change the rules of the game in order for innovation to continue for companies like ours.
Great. Tom? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's generally right. I think it's probably maybe useful to think about what these terms are. I'm not sure that innovation, there's any lack of innovation or reduction of innovation as much as there are real barriers to commercialization, to translation of research. And so when you think about the changes that have occurred in the life science industry over the last 15 years or so, there's been a reduction of internal innovation by large companies, a dependence on smaller companies. The beginning of the food chain is often early stage companies coming out of universities or other centers where there's a critical mass, and that's been fueled in large part by venture capital. So now we have had a decade of uncertainty in venture capital, which in the life science has been exacerbated in the recent years by the FDA, which has introduced a level of risk and uncertainty to the process that's just really sort of stopped everybody in their tracks. So my sense is that that innovation and the translation of innovation is in a period of change and shifting, which will have to occur for companies to get the pipeline of products they need. They have to figure out a different way to commercialize. And that's going to be more challenging because there are fewer venture capitalists, there's less venture capital money in this field. And so there are fewer players, fewer dollars, the need is the same, the barriers are great. And so that's going to, I think, mean that the next 3 to 8 years are going to be real challenging periods of inventing new ways to get the job done and new partnerships.
So less venture capital investment in the kinds of earlier stage device technologies that a company like Terumo might pick up, contraction of the capital markets, like you were saying. What about the biologics, big pharma? What are you all doing?
I think it's consistent. It is about risk mitigation. And you know, that can be done in a variety of ways, whether it's collaboration agreements with universities or someone earlier mentioned the acquisition model. So big pharma looking to small pharma to take compounds maybe through phase 1 and 2. And if a compound at that level, it doesn't look like it's going to make it, big pharma has saved that investment that would be required for phase 1 and 2 development. As with any good crisis comes new growth and new ideas. And one thing I can kind of add to this that's happened at Pfizer, maybe at other companies as well, we've looked for alternate revenue streams. So you'll see growth within the company devoted toward diversifying where future revenues might come from. They're still related to our core business of pharmaceuticals, but it might be, let's say, processes and methods that might be commercializable later that would enhance medication adherence, or that would enhance the patient journey through their early stage to late stage course of their disease. So related to the core business, but very diversified from all your eggs in that chemical structure.
Yeah, I mean, as a scientist, I struggle with saying that we're in a crisis for innovation. I mean, I see discoveries all the time. So I kind of agree with Tom in the sense of how we define that, that innovation, what that means. And we definitely are going through changes. I mean, I think what my colleagues have pointed out as far as the changes in the venture capital, just the position that large pharma is in right now, with a real lull in their portfolios to be able to fill those revenue streams, are forcing us to do things that we have not done in the past, types of collaborations and deals and alliances, not only with academic, but with small biotechs in a very different way than deals are structured, as we just mentioned, as far as the risk mitigation up front. And then also academic, we're reaching out obviously in a big way to try to help with some of the early portfolio and feeding that pipeline for future revenue streams.
So how are a lot of those industry academic collaborations have been making headlines. Pfizer has been very much in the press for your Centers for Therapeutic Innovation. Locally, University of Michigan and MedImmune had a press release last year about cancer therapeutics. Just for a moment in the therapeutic space, how are these academic partnerships different than what might have happened 5-10 years ago, and how are they being measured?
You want to take that one, Kevin, since Pfizer's been making the biggest splash?
Yeah, I guess I should
CTI.
I should read more headlines, but more time in the day. No, I mean, I would go back to what I was saying before, and I would just maybe pick on an example of something that's kind of happened here. So we have compounds in the area of pain, the therapeutic area of pain, but as, you know, almost out of serendipity, I've used that word before, but it's a good word and it fits a lot of times. Through conversations, meetings at high levels, you know, between Pfizer and university folks, there were some rough common goals identified in the area of pain management. And as we drilled down into those, we found, you know, the farther we drilled down, there was still a lot of common discussion that, yeah, we are both interested in this concept. And the concept was assisting the whole patient journey from primary care through specialists utilization through diagnostic testing in the area of pain management, facilitating that whole process. Because the experts that were here, the clinical experts here at Michigan, identified that, yeah, they validated for us, which we strongly thought is that was a huge problem, therapeutic problem in our healthcare system. And there were costs built into that, unnecessary costs built into that. So as we talk about reducing costs, you know, inherent costs in the system, that, you know, that was one area that we identified. So from that grew potentially some patient education, provider education, using IT to facilitate that whole process that might be commercializable later. And, you know, Pfizer decided and U of M decided that it was a good partnership to continue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and let me add to that. I mean, just because our ex-VP at MedImmune went to Pfizer to start up a lot of these kinds of academic and is in charge of a lot of these academic industry partnerships that are revolved around maybe some more of the earlier portfolio versus the later stuff. So, you know, some of the differences that I've seen that Pfizer, Sanofi, ourselves are doing now, there appears to be much more interaction, much more collaboration involved in the collaborations. What I've seen in the past, you know, university take some product up to X, hand it off to industry, we take it through, you know, development. What's happening now is a much more integrated partnership, and Pfizer is a great example of what they've done as far as putting industry staff into universities or on-site. We're doing a similar thing in Israel and Australia with a broad network of universities there where we've got folks on staff to monitor developments, but then also to interact with them as far as what our needs are as a corporation. So there's many ways and levels at which these collaborations are occurring, and all of which are designed with the same end goal. And you ask the question, so how do we measure its success? And I think it's a little bit too early for this new wave of academic collaborations to show that success. Drug development, unfortunately, takes a long time. So I think time will tell as far as whether or not these are going to be any different than what was done a decade ago, 20 years ago.
Is there a different way of thinking about collaboration with academics? Let's just stick with academics for now in the med device world.
I think a lot of the same types of themes exist, that the collaborations are much more engaging, where in the past we may have worked with the university, outlined a program, provided funding for that, stepped away, waited for the university to come back to us. Today, it's much more integrated. You know, while we may not necessarily be to the point of having people right on site, we are definitely involved in getting updates, maybe making subtle changes in course, and the university is engaged with us much deeper into our process as well, much further into commercialization than possibly university was 10 years ago.
Anything to add, Tom?
No, although I was just thinking when you said that the University of Michigan in the last 5 years or so introduced the Office of Business Engagement, which I guess is in part a response to making it easier for these kinds of collaborations to occur. Coincident, I don't know if it's coincidental or what, but I think that's part of that trend as well.
And what about stakes that the larger companies that you represent might make in smaller companies, even startup companies? Is the attitude towards that changing? I know some of the larger companies even have venture arms now that are quite active in early stage, almost like what the venture capital firms used to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start, I guess. I mean, MedImmune does have a venture arm, MediVentures, it's called. It's been in existence for, I don't know, 6-7 years now. And they've been very active in funding and small startups. But from a business relationship perspective, I haven't seen that much change in our interaction, our desire to want to in-license products or technology from small companies versus large versus academic. I mean, I think that is there, that need is there, maybe a little bit more so now than before, but we're still actively engaged in reviewing technologies and in-licensing, at least within MedImmune.
Med device space, 10 years ago, getting involved with an early stage company, making a financial investment, really is something that we wouldn't even have considered doing. We would have let those companies incubate themselves, get sources of funding from venture capital, and then at the point when either they had working prototypes or they had 510K clearance, or they were actually in the marketplace, we would look at an acquisition or some sort of licensing at that point. Today, for a variety of reasons, we're much more interested in sitting down with those companies at a very early stage. One, we get to direct those activities much more specifically to what's interesting for us. Two, we get in on the ground floor because we're early dollars going in. That provides us with leverage later, assuming that there's success. And three, it really is incumbent on us to look for other ways to go and move this forward, and really following in some of the footsteps of what we've seen with pharma. Medical device is certainly not as far involved in this as pharma is. You don't see true venture arms of medical device companies today, but there are a lot more discussions happening that are along those lines than what I've ever seen in the past.
That's interesting.
And my theory is that has to happen, because if it doesn't happen, the pipeline just won't be there for the medical device companies or biotech or whatever. And in the past, the companies had the luxury of seeing what came to them, because there was a lot of There are thousands of venture-funded companies, and they would actually spend their money, when you think about it in hindsight, maybe not as smartly as they could have, because there was this process and there were enough exits that motivated you to think that if you started a company, there would be a buyer. And so a lot of money got wasted in that process because there weren't always buyers. So now, without those funds coming to the big companies, I think the companies, to protect their self-interest, have to be more engaged earlier on. And that's actually a good thing, because that means that the venture people who are going to take the early risk are going to have much more direction from an ultimate buyer, ultimate customer. And it should make for a more efficient process, actually. Maybe not in the short run, when it's going to be a little starved for capital and players, but it could be a change which could be very constructive.
There's been a lot of talk recently about pre-competitive models of collaboration and once competitive companies now coming together and trying to share data in a more open environment. Are any of your companies moving in that direction, experimenting with that concept? And tell us a little bit about it if they are.
Yeah, I mean, AstraZeneca certainly is involved in pre-competitive kind of open collaborations. One such initiative, it's a fairly large initiative in Europe. I think it's the Innovative Medicines Initiative, IMI, where the European Union has put in like $1 billion. Pharmas are matching that, and basically coming together to solve common hurdles to all pharmaceutical development. So it's not something that is going to immediately give somebody a competitive edge per se, but is going to benefit the industry as a whole. Drug development is too costly, takes too much time. So we all recognize that, and working together trying to come over and come over those obstacles is the goal and the initiative of that particular pre-competitive. And we're in discussions with other similar types of initiatives or coalitions or whatever that have very similar types of goals in mind.
Any other comments on that? No? Well, we've actually spent a little bit of time talking. I just want to check in with the folks out there and see if there's any questions that you have for our panelists. There's one up here. Oh, we have a microphone, actually, if you wouldn't mind, sir.
I think everybody sort of skirted around the FDA, which you brought up as being one of the impediments. And I've been working with 3 or 4 companies in various capacities here in the last couple weeks, and one of them was a therapeutic company that has been funded by venture capital, but they've been in business now for 10, 11 years now and haven't had an exit, and the venture capitalists get a little tired of that. Certainly the angel investors are definitely tired of that, because that's way past whatever they'd like to be. And even in the medical device side, a medical device company, that the technology was starting to come out of the university 20 years ago. And they're not even into their clinical trials. So there's, and I think a lot of it has to do with the FDA. So could you sort of talk a little bit about how you think the FDA could improve their process? You don't have to malign them, just give us some ideas.
It's an invitation.
Well, I would say that from the med device side, the biggest concern with the FDA today is uncertainty. We can go build a model that'll ultimately work, and it may take some time to adapt if we know what to expect. It's when we don't know what to expect that it becomes very difficult. It becomes difficult for the venture people. It becomes difficult for people on my side of the buy equation for that technology when we really don't know when the product could be commercially available. That to me is the biggest problem, that when we go and we take a look at a potential acquisition, the uncertainty of when it begins generating revenue is a huge part of the equation. And how do we go collectively work to go reduce that uncertainty? And again, whatever the result is, if the variation of it is controlled, we can ultimately work to a stable system. But the variation just makes it really difficult to move forward.
So I am not too current with the FDA myself, but my sense in talking to people who are is that it seems like it's more of a policy issue. You know, that it isn't like what could they fix, it's what they really want to achieve is the question. And I'm thinking that until somebody really understands the predicament that we're going to be in if we really slow down this rate of innovation, somebody will have to deal with a policy issue of what they want to achieve and how they want to go about it. Because now there's no clear direction there to do anything different. So I don't know why it would change under the current circumstances.
When it's very current today to start talking about launch strategies that are not U.S. first.
Right.
You know, kind of adding on to what you said, you know, if as a world we get to a point where we've got devices, we've got pharmaceuticals that are treating people in countries outside of the U.S. and people are dying in the U.S., that's going to get a lot of attention. That'll start to change public policy.
Right.
Hopefully it never gets to that point.
Last few years, there seems to be an increased interest from the pharmaceutical and biotech industry in rare and orphan disease therapeutics. What do you see evolving there? Do you see that still increasing interest from the major pharmaceuticals as well as biotech companies?
I do, for sure. I mean, in my particular area of interest, oncology, what we're seeing is more and more segmentation of patient populations, albeit orphan status or taking even a large cancer type like breast cancer or lung cancer, but yet the understanding that we've had is that not everybody's created equal, that each drug is going to have their special niche. And so that's why I think there's been a continual movement to accept those kinds of orphan indications, disease settings, because that's ultimately where, if you're having success, real success, and in oncology, I'm not talking about prolonging survival by a month, which unfortunately drugs get approved because of that. It's, you know, having real benefit, patient benefit. Drug companies will make their money, you know, if they're having that kind of, because then you're changing oncology into, you know, a real acute disease into more of a chronic disease. And so there's ways of doing your commercial models and still making the money you need. And I think that organizations are starting to believe that, and that's why you're seeing more and more movement into that kind of space.
Follow up on that. What do you see as the prospects for cross-industry collaboration? Because when you're talking about not a breast cancer patient, but a triple-negative breast cancer patient, but a triple-negative breast cancer patient who's got a P53 and an AKT and a BRCA pathway mutation, suddenly we're down to 100 patients, and maybe Genentech has a great drug targeting one pathway and Pfizer has a drug targeting another, and we really need to say we're going to get more than 2% of the patients enrolled in trials, or we're going to fall even further behind in the clinical trials process.
I think there's a couple of hurdles there. I mean, traditionally, pharmaceutical companies have not played well together in the sandbox. I mean, I think that's been pretty well known. But there are also hurdles to that. So when you're talking about novel combinations, it's hard enough to do that within a single pharmaceutical company, let alone taking one pharmaceutical company's drug and another. FDA hurdles start to abound as well that make it difficult. But I think, you know, what I'm seeing, and AstraZeneca has been one of the first companies that have now done a kind of novel with a different compound and a very select patient population with Merck. And you know, more and more, I think we're moving into that space. And I'm hoping that that kind of collaboration will continue. But not to say that it's going to be an easy or quick road, for sure.
With whole genome sequencing costing less than one cycle of chemotherapy, very quickly every single cancer is going to be an orphan disease.
Yeah. Absolutely. And every, I think, we're seeing with the likes of crizotinib, where it's treating barely 5% of lung cancer. It's seeing that a company can make money off of that successfully and have, a revenue stream around that. I think, again, that's all opening the doors to this more personalized type of medicine approach from a pharmaceutical perspective.
An op-ed in the Wall Street Journal yesterday essentially summarized data and concluded that all the investment in health IT doesn't seem to be doing a whole lot more to improve quality care and control costs. I was wondering if anybody could speculate as to what sort of technology and specific capabilities might be needed to make health IT a roaring success, and I might even suggest that the answer relates very much to the talk about personalization and so on that I've heard so far in response to questions from David and others.
I'll start out. I think right now we're at a phase where we're swimming in data, but we don't know what to do with it. And it's the prospects, the future is going to be much better than where we're at now or where we were 5 years ago, but the systems aren't in place yet. You look across just the state of Michigan, and there are a few different major IT companies out there, registry companies working in the primary care space, and you see some companies being bought up. So there's this whole dynamic going on in the IT world that creates some instability there, I guess, and that's going to delay that process. But it's all part of the process heading toward the ultimately, better use of whether it's predictive modeling or identifying those patients in primary care and then getting the right message, using those systems to the right primary care doc who can deliver the right targeted message to the right patient at just the right time. It's not a simple process, and it's it's a journey. We're on that journey right now.
Yeah, I'm not sure we know what problem it is we're trying to solve. And so there's a lot of data that's out there. Some of that data is pretty questionable. As we go push it up because we're not sure exactly what we want, we push nothing or we push everything, and it's difficult. Nobody has come up with that first application for how we want to go use that data. At that point, then people like my industry can say, okay, here's how we play in to helping to solve that problem. But today, I can give you a machine that will push up every reading we've taken on you during a 6-hour cardiac bypass surgery, but who cares? And we're not sure who cares yet. So do we do that? Don't we do that? Or what readings out of that 6-hour procedure really are paramount to what we want to go do with it? Somebody's got to start to come up with a why. And then we're certainly in a position to go solve those technology problems. But just throwing technology at it yet, I'm not sure that really furthers the cause.
I have a more jaded even opinion. I think I just bought a new car this year, and I have this dashboard, which is really cool. I've got the backup camera so I can see how I'm going backwards. I've got calculations on every kind of mileage per gallon efficiency I can come up with. And, there's more data than I can possibly. It's a wonder I can drive and not have an accident. There's just so many things. But if you think about if that were analogous to IT in healthcare, and you think about saying, well, this is so cool. I'm a better driver. I get better mileage and all this good stuff. So we should really put this on every car in America. Well, it's not going to go on every car in America because Chryslers are different than Fords, than GMs, and new cars are different than old cars. And it's the same thing. I think the healthcare system is broken. And it doesn't really matter how great the IT system is. If you have a broken system, it's too hard to introduce something great for a system that doesn't know what it wants, how it wants to operate, how it measures results. And there are thousands of IT companies that have died trying, but it's just too complicated because the system, nobody's figured out the next step, you know, and whatever you could get U of M to use, you're not going to get St. Joe's to use, and it's really a complicated problem. It's needed, but we need to fix the system. It's not the IT, it's the system.
And there's as we all know, there's that if we're thinking about this as some sort of, you know, multivariate regression model, which I'm a stats geek, so I tend to do that. The R squared of what we're going to be able to control is limited with just IT. IT is not going to be the whole answer. Ultimately, cliche as it sounds, it comes back to that patient-provider relationship and some of the behavioral changes that are, you know, going on or not going on. And IT is not the answer, so not the complete answer anyway.
Question in the front?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just, I'm curious, back to, you know, an earlier part of the conversation, I think, you know, because we started off in doom and gloom mode, and then there was actually some hope. You know, it sounds like there's a new kind of relationship between industry and academics that you guys are getting in earlier with academics than ever before. And I'm just wondering what guidance you can give us academics to make it go easier. I mean, we are trying to change our culture, but what can we do to actually make this even work better? What would be your guidance?
Well, I'll make two suggestions. As somebody who spent time trying to think about how to get from point A to point B, is that I think one thing that these macro changes will hopefully result in is a greater opportunity for the investigator to have a sense of what the customer actually needs. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement there, because you can't help, you know, if you're doing your thing and writing your grants and writing the papers, it's hard to know, just because you're working in cardiovascular disease and they're doing cardiovascular disease stuff doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing the right thing. And it's often just tweaking it a little bit and you'd hit pay dirt. But knowing what the customer wants and what actually would go into their strategic plan and their product line, and, you know, to the extent that investigators can learn more about that, they will be more creative with their work, they'll be more on target, they'll have more in common with them. So I think part of it is learning more about the customer, and then the second one is learning about what the customer's hurdles are. So often academic investigators, the needs that they have to publish the paper are different from the needs when you go to see David. What he needs is going to be different. And so to the extent that there can be better education about the data package that he needs to get excited about it. Because it isn't just that his company is in your space. Some group of scientists like you is going to consider your work, and to the extent that you know what they look for, it'll be a much more productive process. So at the end of the day, what people are looking for is, you know, they're trying to reduce the risk of this huge, long time frame we have in this industry, which means huge capital costs, huge fundraising needs. So this process is going to have to force us to be more efficient. What's the shortest path? What's the fastest way we can get there with the least amount of capital? And the more you know about the customer, the faster you can get down that path.
Yeah, I agreed, and I'll add just one more thing to that. I think that was really well said. I mean, on a personal note, obviously what has to take place for that to work is putting egos aside. And oftentimes, you know, pharmaceutical companies would come in and say, hey, we're funding this, you're going to do it our way. We need to relax from that. I think, you know, academics have a lot to learn about drug development, and as Tom just said, what ultimately we need to get a project to move forward to a clinical space. You know, we've got that background. So it's truly got to be a partnership. And so I think that by the framework that these new collaborations are being established, I think hopefully will foster that. a little bit better than it has been in the past. And, so I'm hopeful that that's going to be what it takes.
And some early small successes can really help that process go along.
Just coming back to your comment about automobiles, it is true that deaths per passenger mile are a fraction of what they were even a decade ago. And as a member of the baby boom generation, we're starting to see our reaction times slow and our vision deteriorate. The fact that Google is talking about self-driving cars may keep a lot of us on the road a lot longer. But the process will, many of the IT innovations, when you look at a microscopic level, has the PC really made a secretary more productive? It's hard to show that. And yet, Kroger's, for example, has eliminated a whole tier of middle management by automated inventory management. And so healthcare is ripe in the sense that lots of processes are still using antiquated methods. But it will be a process level change rather than looking microscopically at, do we make the ER doc more productive at treating this particular case? But also, on the subject of kind of industry collaboration, looking at engineering schools and the engineering industry, there's much more faculty exchange back and forth between industry than there is in the life sciences. And engineering schools are much better than life sciences graduate schools at building entrepreneurship into their curriculum. And I think the reality is we are overtraining life scientists. The fact that PhD graduates from the University of Michigan are significantly underemployed, or that adjunct faculty are paid at poverty level, says we are overtraining. We need industry to be absorbing more PhD graduates, and we need more interchange between, at a faculty level, to learn how to present the problem to industry to make this an attractive collaboration.
I wanted to go back to the previous question, just a general question you were touching on too, is barriers for collaboration. I think the whole world of, I helped teach one of our ethics classes at the College of Pharmacy here, the whole world of conflict of interest management, disclosure, and even bridging over into the regulatory world, that needs to be standardized a little bit more between industry and academia. I was 10 years in academia, 15 in industry, so kind of trying to take all of that in. I think industry actually is a little bit farther ahead right now in terms of conflict of interest management, because we've had to be. I'm sure there are folks who disagree. On the regulatory side, I kind of laugh, although it is a little bit indicative. I'm a huge Michigan football fan, so I'll start out by saying that. But one of the slogans of the medical center here is leaders and best. Pfizer would need 2 positive randomized controlled trials to make that claim.
I had a question about IT and the HIPAA regulations and how they interface. And I think that HIPAA is actually slowing some of the IT production. And I'm just wondering what your comments were on that.
Which is funny because it was meant to do the opposite. It was meant to make our healthcare data more transportable, right?
Saying because of HIPAA, how is that going to happen with IT becoming so popular? And now that's the future of medicine and the relationship between the patient and the physician. All of those things are going to change dramatically. So how is HIPAA going to be protected by IT and vice versa?
Well, I'll say from our standpoint, dealing with devices that collect and hold data, HIPAA certainly is an issue for us. As we get devices back from the field, we've had to institute a whole nother layer of protocols for how we go deal with that data. Can we just simply go eliminate it from the device? Our customers, the hospitals, then they really not want that data to be eliminated. So then it has to go be preserved in a vault while we go do diagnostics and repair on the device, and then that data has to get restored to the device. It becomes a whole nother set of things that we need to deal with. It's certainly not insurmountable, right? And we have dealt with it. But when we talk about how to be quick, how to be nimble, you know, the intent of HIPAA was to be able to go make that data be portable, but the real world of how we interact with hospitals means that it has to really be front and center in everything that we consider when we're talking about our devices. Again, anything that's going to hold any piece of patient data, we now need to make sure that we've addressed that. Right. Right, so you can't just go eliminate the data, right? It has a purpose, and so again, you have to pull it out. You've got to wrap it, make sure it's preserved, and then you got to put it back when we're done doing the types of things we do with our devices.
I think there was one more question in the back somewhere. Oh, here and then there. Yep.
I really appreciate the question related to the interaction between the industry and academia. At the end of in academia, I kindly say to the PIs, especially in life sciences, to humble a little bit and to listen a little bit more to the industry and just not to consider themselves kind of gods. On the other hand, when I think in the industry, they should offer more internship for especially PhDs, so they get more exposed to the industry. And it could be maybe one of the requirements of the PhD program at the university during their rotation to do a kind of internship, even a few months of internship at a pharmaceutical company. Because this will give more flexibility and more experience or knowledge to these PhDs when they finish their PhDs, they will help them more whether to decide if they would like to stay in the academia or to move into the industry, or to be an incentive to build a bridge between academia and industry, because the resources are becoming less and less. So everybody has to work with everybody.
I know the schools of pharmacy seem to have many of these exchange programs, if you will.
Yeah, I mean,
industry.
The ways I've been staying involved in teaching, the teaching program at the college have been through either, as I mentioned earlier today, the investigational requirement of the doctoral pharmacy candidates, so I'll sometimes help precept some of those projects. Externship rotations that they'll do with me, so they'll sort of work with me on an externship for a month or two, and then or teaching didactically in some of their classes. And I agree, it's huge value. It kind of helps that mutual understanding of different priorities or work structures or what have you.
I think we have time for another one there.
This is just a comment. After a quarter of a century in industry, the very first thing that needs to be done is industry needs to look into its own heart and solve its own problems first. Because, I'll give one example. As a consultant, 3 years or 4 years ago, I went and I looked at a drug from a small company, and there was no data on it. And luckily for the two gentlemen up here, it was their French rivals who spent $500 million on something with no data. And until industry deals with those kinds of whoopsies, and I suspect you know which drug I'm talking about, since it got a lot of publicity recently, we will not see a rise in productivity in our industry. Because it doesn't matter what you do. If you make decisions of that caliber regularly, you are not going to develop drugs. Thank you.
Any comments, rebuttals, thoughts?
I'm not sure I heard it enough to answer. I got the end. I mean, was the gist of that was an ill-advised decision and as an example of the waste in the industry, and was that?
It was an ill-advised decision where I had to do preclinical package on that drug.
Right.
And there was literally no preclinical package there, and they paid $500 million for it.
So
God only knows why.
The problem, I mean, we're in a free market, and the market behaves really well sometimes and really not well other times. Fundamentally, one of the big challenges of innovation in this field is that it's so costly to do it right. And so you're matching the innovation with a market need. And so what drives these people around me? These people are all in companies, and they're trying to make a profit, and they're trying to figure out where they can actually sell something, generate capital to keep this thing going. And so if you have something which they think is really a blockbuster billion-dollar opportunity, which they all need really badly, whether it's a corporation or an investor, we all make this calculation. Is this opportunity so exciting that we're willing to take the risk on less data? I can tell you that from a venture capital perspective, almost every venture capital investment, I could argue, never has enough data to make their first investment. Never. Because there isn't enough time and money for you to ask you to repeat the experiment on a grant that you don't have, to generate more data. So we're always making bets with imprecise data, and we're willing to make bigger and bigger bets which look more ill-advised in hindsight, to the extent there's a gold, big, giant, rainbow brass ring out there. And it's going to keep happening. And the good news is, though, that we should be happy that people keep making the bets, because that's really what fuels the system. And they're not going to get them all right, but they're going to get enough right that people will keep making the bets. That's what we need to have happen. We need to keep people in this business with the capital to keep making the bets. And we need to do it better, and if we can find a way to get a right data package on the same amount of money, great, we'll be more efficient. But the key is we got to keep a pipeline of bets to be made. So it is too bad, and every time it happens, we always laugh at that company and think how stupid they are. But we've all been in that situation, or those of us who've been in the business for a while, because we all get tempted to see if this one isn't the right solution for that great problem. It's just, that's the market we're in.
Just to bring our session to a close, I'd like to invite any or all of our panelists to make a parting comment, an observation that you might have regarding your own company or institution or the industry on what's going right, what's going in the right direction to make sure that we maintain our sort of global leadership in terms of life science innovation.
Well, I think that the fact that we're out having these conversations is huge. To Tom's point earlier, it's not a crisis of innovation, it's a crisis of commercialization, or it could be a crisis of commercialization. How does med device work better with our academic colleagues? How do we all understand what the regulatory challenges are? How do we try and minimize the unpredictability of those regulatory challenges? And how do we continue to change the face of healthcare? The thing that's not going to change is that we're going to have sick people in this country, right? So we have people who need exactly what we're here to go and do in this country and around the world. Our opportunity is to go get really good at what we all want to do in a different way than we've done it before. That's exciting. That's really what we've built this country and our universities around, is how, that's where the innovation really is taking place, is how do we go do what needs to be, what's always been done in a slightly different way than we've historically done it. Again, the fact that we're having those discussions today, we're aware of some of the challenges, we can communicate better with each other, we can absolutely go do what we've continued to do, which is innovate as well as anybody in the world innovates.
Well said, Eric.
Here, here.
Yeah, I can't add a lot to that. I just think we can't stop innovating, and the university has to do everything it can to continue to lead in finding the best way to educate people for this world that we're in, and keep finding better, more efficient ways to innovate. And it is promising that we should be more efficient. We should be smarter about our investments. And part of that has to do with the culture. I thought that idea of, I don't have any idea how practical that is, but the concept makes a lot of sense to me, that to the extent that we can have a closer collaboration of investigators in academia and industry, so that the academicians who are most likely to be at the front of this process understand market needs better, I think we'll have a more efficient process, and it'll be good.
Yeah, I can't add much to that. The necessity of the